Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our live session today. My name is Larissa, I'm an event planner at Reactor, joining you from Brazil. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. The session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand here on the Reactor YouTube channel within 48 hours. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll be dropping health links and checking for questions for our presenter to answer. I'll now turn it over to our speaker for today. So thank you, and let's welcome Chris Norrie here with us.
Thank you so much for that intro, Larissa. Always a pleasure to be part of this stream. Huge welcome to all of you who just tuned in. My name is Chris Norrie, work at Microsoft, and today's topics is about how you can elevate your code experience. So that means if you're using Visual Studio Code, if you're using GitHub Copilot, want to know what are the latest and greatest features, how can you be more efficient using these tools, this is the stream for you. So this is me. If you're interested in connecting, I'm always happy to connect with all of you. Questions, comments, let me know. This is my LinkedIn. Yes, moving on. This is not about me, but this is our table of content today, just so you get a sense of why should I be part of the stream? What can I possibly learn? Like many of you might feel like I know all the features of Visual Studio Code, or maybe you even feel like I'm good at using GitHub Copilot. But guess what? We are churning out features for GitHub Copilot at a breakneck speed. So for that reason, I've taken the time to cherry pick a few of these features that I think you should know about. And so hopefully this is a good listen. So first off, we'll talk about the basics of GitHub Copilot. I think most of you tuning in probably know that, but there are some things that might be new, different modes, different model usage, but also part of the basic interactions that you may or may not have tried using. And then we'll move on to talk about customization. Customization, as you know, is key. We don't want the AI assistant to start churning out code that doesn't look the way that our company wants to or our team wants to. So for that reason, it's really important that you know how to customize. Sorry. So we'll talk about something called custom instructions. We'll discuss prompt files and also look at various chat modes, because guess what? You can create your own chat modes. It's not just us. And lastly, we'll talk about probably what everyone else in the world has been talking about for the last 6 months, Model Context Protocol and MCP. And guess what? A lot of support is there already for MCP, and we are working around the clock to add even more features. So we'll talk about what are some good MCP servers that you should be installing as a developer? How do I even install? What are manifest files? What about registries, and how does this thing work for me? So don't worry, you'll leave this stream feeling like I know what MCP is. I have a good starter kit of servers, and I know how to control everything around me. So now you have a sense what we're about to cover today. So let's dive right in. Okay, so here's where you're starting. If you have never installed GitHub Copilot before, this is what is facing you once you manage to install the extensions needed for GitHub Copilot and you are put in this chat mode. But if you know about GitHub Copilot, you know that it's available pretty much everywhere. You can trigger it from the terminal, you can trigger it from an open text window, and you can bring up this chat window so you can have a good chat with your AI assistant. Now, there are a few different ways of interacting, right? Like for one, you have the basic interaction, which means that you are typing a prompt. You're saying what I need done. If you want to create something, you want to change something. Then there's also the idea of different modes. And if you look here at the image that I'm presenting in the bottom left, you see that we have a drop down there. That one says ask. That is one of the 3 different modes. Ask means simply that you have a prompt that you are constructing, you're sending that to your AI assistant, and then it responds to you back in the chat. Okay, so whatever you do stays in the chat, okay? But if you select another mode called edit, that means you can now do multi-file edits, which might be quite useful for many of you, because sometimes you just do. So let's say, for example, that you're adding a new feature, you're supporting listing of products, then that needs to work in the front end, it needs to work in the back end, it needs to work in the database layer, and so on. So you can just imagine that we want help changing all of those files as part of that vertical that we're building. And of course, what most of us have gotten used to in the late days is the agent mode. If you used other AI tools, for example, Cursor or Claude Code, you know that you have an agent that you can just fire off, and that thing does a lot of things to your code, right? It's creating files, it's running commands, it's doing a lot of things. And of course, GitHub Copilot has this agent mode that works in a similar fashion. But don't worry, I'll show you demos how that works so you know exactly what the agent can do for you and what's being asked of you. Okay, so let's start with the ask mode. This is the basic mode. If you've never done GitHub Copilot before, this is your time to really sharpen your ears. So the idea here is that we type a prompt and we get a response based on that prompt. And as you've probably noticed by now, if you're using any kind of AI assistant, it matters how you prompt, how much context you're providing. So if you want something built, a new app, or you want to change your code, it's important to bring in all that context. If you are asking for various web frameworks, for example, to be used, or certain test frameworks, you should specify that as part of your prompt. That's not 100% true, though, because we'll talk about custom instructions later in this presentation. But for now, in the basic mode, before we start involving configuration files, the more context you can have in your prompt initially, the better. Okay, so let's actually show a demo of this, how this could work. So the idea here is that we're inside of Visual Studio Code, right? And as I said before, there are many ways of having a chat with your AI assistant. One way is go into the chat window and type a prompt. Another one is to simply go inside of your open text window and add a comment. So based on that comment, then you can hit tab and you can wait for it to produce what's known as ghost text. And once that appears, you have the option to accept it or not. So here we can see in our VS Code, I'm using GitHub's dark dimmed theme, if someone wonders. I'd love to hear what themes you all are using, and I'd also love to know where you're all from. So please post any comments. We're here to learn from each other. So here I'm doing a fairly simple use case of creating a function that can validate an email. But as you can see, I could either produce the results directly in the open text file by creating this comment, hitting tab, or I can bring the very same prompt into the chat window. I don't actually need the // This is just me being lazy. He didn't take it away. But as you can see, it's context aware. So it's able to see, you know what, Chris, you already have the information that you need in this text file. There's nothing here for me to do, but I can totally explain the code for you. And that's kind of nice, right? So what we've learned so far is that when I'm inside of an open text window and start typing a comment or start typing any code, this is known as the inline mode. Or I can also bring up a similar mode with either Control or Command plus I. That would also trigger that menu. And there's also different chat modes available. As you can see, we have gone into the Ask chat mode so far, but there are two other ones called Edit and Agent, and we will cover those soon. So Inline is good for small things. So usually when I have an open text file and I just want to change a few parameters, or maybe the function name, or maybe what a function is doing, then I go into the open text file to do those changes. However, if I have big sweeping changes, then it's a good idea to open up your chat window instead, because then you can have a conversation and say, I want all of these things done. I want to build a new vertical or new feature, whatever I'm trying to do with my system. So now we understand why there's two different modalities, because that's simply how you work as developers, right? You need these different modalities to be efficient. Now, as I said, there are two other chat modes, Edit and Agent. We're going to skip Edit today because that's just multi-file edit. This is something that the agent can do as well. So we're going to focus on Agent because that's what everyone's talking about these days, right? So the agent here is great when you ask for broader changes. It's fantastic when you're asking it to set up a project in TypeScript or Python or whatever your language is, maybe .NET. So my point is, if you use the agent for that, then not only are you asking it to set up a project, but it's actually going to create files for you. It's going to run commands for you. So it can even add tests. So an agent is perfect, but it also means that the role that you are playing as a developer is sometimes more of a creative director, right? That you are the visionary. You have an idea for an app, which is ultimately great, right? Because that means we have a good tool. You still have your developer know-how, but now you can focus on doing the things that matters, the architecting, rather than doing all the nitty-gritty that is just repeating code that you've written hundreds of times before anyway. But what's important as part of that process of using an agent is that you start off with the prompt where you define what you want done, but then you are also given a chance to do what's known as human in the loop, where you can verify the agent's work and say, am I actually happy with what the agent produced, or do I want to do changes? So how does that work? Let's look at another demo so we get a sense of this agent. So in this case, we are starting off where we left off. So now we have our email function, but now we're thinking, this is probably pretty useful, right? I mean, I have a utility function here. Wouldn't it be fantastic if I can take this utility function and maybe create several utility functions? What if I even create a project from this? What if I add tests? I mean, you can see, right? I mean, what usually start off as a very small experiment can easily grow into this big project. And before you know it, it's being integrated as part of all the other apps. But here's what I'm saying. Let's try to be smart about this. Always ask yourself when you use an AI agent, could an AI be doing this for me? And leverage your smarts where you really need it, like architecting or validating the work or writing a piece of gnarly code that's hard for the AI to get right. So let's have a look. So now we're inside here and we're going to use the chat mode. So now we've switched to agent mode in the bottom right here. So make sure it says agent instead of ask. So now we're telling it to set up tests for this file, create a Node.js project with everything. So now it needs to infer from context what everything means. And I need tasks, I need dependencies, I need configuration. As you can see, it's a very high level instruction, but I expect the agent to be able to deliver. And imagine that you're now doing all of this manually, right? I mean, if this is a Node.js project, you'd write like npm init, right? And you get your basic files, and then you need to start thinking about what dependencies do I need? How do I set up tasks? How do I set up configuration? I mean, you've done this a million times before, but just imagine that an agent does it for you instead. Don't you like the sound of that? Of course you do, right? So now we're in a place where it figures out a to-do list. So you can see here at the very top right how it creates a to-do list of 7 different to-dos that it needs to perform. So that's great to know also that the agent kind of reasons to figure out how to interpret the instruction that Chris just gave me. And yeah, at all steps, when the agents need to do something that's out of the ordinary, it's going to ask you for permission, as you just saw, to run certain tools. And this is just to ensure that it's not editing files that are a bit sensitive, right? So now it's creating a project for us. So it's already created a package JSON. And now what it's showing us is changes that it wants to do, but it's forcing us to either press keep or undo. If you press keep, this is going to be a permanent change. If you press undo, this is something that will just be undone. So as you can see, throughout all of these 7 steps that it's taking, it's showing us the intermediate results. So if we see where it's now at, it's saying, I'm going to create a test suite for the email validation function. Okay, fair enough. It seems to be done with that. So now it's working on ESLint. So it's very context aware also. It's very aware that we have a Node.js project and not a Python project. And now it's working on creating tasks as well. So now it goes into the .vs Code folder where it usually places these tasks. And now it's saying, hey, you know what? I want to edit tasks JSON. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll allow that. And it seems like it's done with the linting. That's the previous task. It just needed me to accept it. So now I'm just looking through what it produced before I'm going to allow it to continue. And what you can see here already is that we have our function. We have a way that we can easily use it. It's being exported. That's going to be great, especially if you're going to use it as a library. And if we look here back on the bottom right, we see that it's creating a task configuration. The package JSON is set up for us. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, I know if you're Node.js developers, you know that you're going to spend a bunch of time populating this scripts tag here that we see on line 6. So now we have test, we have test watch, we have test coverage, we have lint. And oh yeah, it created a git ignore file for me as well. That's also swell, right? So yeah, little by little, you're seeing how it's able to create all of these things for us. And yeah, let's move on, because now I think you get the gist, right? You get the idea what the agent does in comparison to the ask mode. So instead of the ask mode just being you typing a prompt and you get a prompt response, now you actually have something that's truly valuable because it's creating files, it's installing dependencies, it does a lot of things. So the agent mode is really, really fantastic if, for example, when you initially scaffold projects, or you feel like, hey, I want to add this and that test library, but then you realize that there are actually a few things involved with adding a test library, like setting it up, so configuration file, installing dependencies, create those first tests before you're actually done. So agent mode really shines at greenfield projects, but even more so, I would say, if you're asking it to go around and do multiple file changes. So multi-file edits, running commands, which could be useful, and bigger and broader changes. So this is the bare minimum, right, when it comes to GitHub Copilot usage. So we've learned the basic interaction modes. We've seen the inline mode, we've seen the chat mode, and we've also now seen the agent mode. And hopefully we feel like that's actually useful. So what else? What else? I mean, you're all here to learn the latest and greatest. So maybe this was just repetition for many of you. So let's dive into one of the more exciting features, I think, namely models. So as you know, GitHub Copilot started off like 1 or 2 models, but these days we have a long list of different models that you can use. And of course, we want you to use your favorite model. And different models are good at different things. So for example, Claude Sonnet is very, very good at programming, whereas other models shine in other different contexts. So there's GPT models, there's Claude Sonnet models. Select the model for your scenario. I believe that Claude Sonnet is actually the default nowadays, because we've heard your feedback. We want to ensure that you have a model that's default, because we assume a lot of people using GitHub Copilot are in fact developers. But the good news here is that we are supporting you using a lot of different providers. So that means Anthropic, Azure, and even local models like Ollama, for example. So don't feel like your model isn't there. I can almost guarantee you it is, because you have so many different choices. With that said, let's have a look at another demo. So in this case, we are continuing where we were. We have our project. It's a bit more set up right now, but now we're thinking, what model choices do I have? So let's have a look at that. So you can see that how Claude Sonnet is there, but we also have an auto selection. So GPT-4.1, 4.0, GPT-5, and you see that we have different providers. I can even use something like Meta Llama 3.1 if I've downloaded that locally, because now I'm using Ollama, right? So it's a local model provider. You see that we have Gemini and whatever model. So don't worry, I guarantee you almost that the model that you're after is in this list. But of course, now I've actually selected it, so it's using one of the local models. And this is just me telling you all. Local models are great for testing, but they're not always the fastest, which you're about to learn. So now that I'm sitting here demoing the usage of this model, remember that it runs locally. Had I run this from a hosted provider out there, it probably would have responded in milliseconds. So now we're sitting tight, waiting for a locally run model to respond on that. Could take up to probably 30 seconds, right? So I believe in this demo that I have a point in which I actually give up and just show you the difference. So if you're worried about spending credits or spending one of these premium requests, using local models could be a good fallback. But I would say for your general developer flow, it's probably better to use one of the models that we have in the list here. So now I'm actually going to stop the execution here because I'm impatient, but you can also see how we have this right column where we say whether this costs you a premium request or not. So 0x means that you can use that if you're paying for GitHub Copilot, but for other models, that is not going to say 0x, but maybe 1x or 10x. But now you can see, because I selected GPT-4.1, you saw how the response was actually instant. Great. So what did we learn so far? We learned that you can choose any model that you want from any provider that you want, almost. We also learned that some model costs more in terms of premium requests. So keep track on that right column in that drop-down list to see which models are just free to use because you're paying for GitHub Copilot already, and which ones are actually part of a bucket of premium requests where you can only do so many requests before it's going to say, sorry, Chris, you can't use this model anymore. You've spent all your premium requests. But you also saw how we had different providers like Anthropic, Azure, and even Olama for connecting to local models. But as I said, local models are a bit slow. I maybe wouldn't recommend those for your normal developer workflow, but it's good to know that you can definitely use them. But having said that, there's definitely local models that will answer you a lot faster. So probably I just did a bad selection as well. Right. So now we've gone through what a lot of people might refer to as maybe the basics, some basic prompting, some basic usage of the agent mode. But guess what? As soon as you start using GitHub Copilot, you probably discover that your company or your team, you have all these rules and regulations for what the code should look like. And if you start using GitHub Copilot without any customization, you're probably going to get generic code that you end up changing, right? Nobody wants to change code, especially if the AI has done all the heavy lifting. So what do? Well, we customize. That's the short answer. And the great news is that there are different ways of customizing. So one thing you can do is something called custom instructions. That means that we're going to create a file that we're forcing GitHub Copilot to look at for each request and make sure that it adheres to whatever I'm writing in that file. But we can take this a step further. So instead of just having one really bloated file, we can divide that file into many specialized files, like a front-end file, a back-end file, a database file, maybe a security file, and so on and so forth. But there's also such a thing called prompt files that you can use and virtually define your own commands. You might have seen today how we have different commands in GitHub Copilot. We have these @ commands, we have / commands, and other types of commands that you can use for various tasks, but you can define your own tasks, which could be really useful if you have things that are very bespoke, very typical to you and your workflow. We'll see also as part of a demo how you could be utilizing these. And if you haven't discovered custom file modes, they are a big wow experience. First time I saw these, I'm like, of course, where have you been all my life? So I'll definitely show you, but just to mention really quickly what custom file modes are. What they are specialized agents. So imagine that you're just a developer. That's just one personality. That's just one way of doing things. So imagine in a team of people, right? You usually have a front-ender, you have a few back-enders, you have a database specialist, you might have a security specialist, maybe an ops person. But now that I'm supposed to use AI agents, imagine now that you can create these personalities, but within your GitHub Copilot, then you get a sense for what custom file modes are actually about and what they can do for you. There's also the agents MD file, and this one exists because you might be using different AI editors. No judgment here. If you're using Cursor for certain scenarios, maybe with your home project, keep doing that. If you're using GitHub Copilot for work, keep doing that. What I'm saying is that Agents MD is a standard that a lot of AI agent companies have agreed upon and say, whatever you place in here, whichever agent you're using, I will abide by the instructions in this file. So now you know that this file exists. Okay, so let's talk about custom instructions first as one part of our customization journey. This is your global file, if you will. The idea is that you create this under your GitHub folder, .github, and then you create it and calling it custom instructions like so. And then the mindset I want you to have when you talk about custom instructions is that it's on project level, right? So anything on variable naming, architecture, big sweeping things that you want to be true for the entire project, that's the information you put in here. So see it as a generic thing, but still imposing the rules that your team or your company might have. Now, let's see a demo of how custom instructions could work for you. So what I've done here, if you look at the top left, is to create this custom instructions file. Now, I've on purpose bloated it a little bit. There's more in here that's needed, but I just want you to have a sense of what could be in there. So what you're seeing here is that I'm trying to build a full stack TypeScript project. So for that reason, I have a lot of opinions on things. I don't want GitHub Copilot to just create code. I want it to have an opinion on what major layers should be in my app. So the front end, the back end, the database, the build tools, the package manager. As you can see, I have a lot of opinions on these things. Choice of framework, choice of libraries, choice of build systems, and so on. And I've also managed to create a project structure. Of course, I'm using GitHub Copilot to populate this file in the first place. But let's see what we have here. So as part of running this, if you notice here at the bottom right, I'm starting to type, create a front-end component that's meant to handle the user's profile page. So now I'm using keywords like front-end, right? Which means that GitHub Copilot should have a look in the custom instructions file and follow the project structure for that. So now it's really obeying me because now it's using this global file as a reference. And it's thereby getting guidance on how to create the files, right? So now it's saying it seems like the project structure doesn't exist, but it's also acknowledging that the custom instruction files is telling it how to define these files. So now it's starting to create these. We see that we get a client folder with a source folder, we get components, we get hooks, we get services, we get types, and even a shared folder. And you can see that's exactly how I'm setting things up according to my custom instruction file. So you see how much better it is to have a custom instruction file than not having it, because you can really specify everything about your project. So now it's starting to create all the models that we need. So if we're happy with that, we can just press keep. And let's have a look and see where it's at. Now it's creating interfaces. It's done with that. And next step is to create the API service for the user profile operations. So it's kind of nice way of being a developer these days, right? In 2025, you are just defining what you need done and you're waiting for it to do all the heavy lifting for you, just like a good tool would, and you are waiting for it to be done so you can inspect the outcome. So it's about coding in a smart way, right? Code when you need to code. And now it's saying something about let me fix environment variable access to be more flexible. And yeah, you just see how it goes on and on and on to fulfill what I'm trying to do. But the good news here is that the custom instruction files was listened to. That's the learning here. If I don't have a custom instruction file, right, it's going to create whatever it thinks is the best. But thanks to me having that file, it suddenly became very opinionated on what the project structure should look like, what framework is being used, how it writes the code, and so on and so forth. So make sure that you create this as a bare minimum today. After you watch today's presentation, create the custom instructions file in that GitHub folder, and I promise you that is a world of difference between having it versus not having it. But as I said, I kind of bloated that custom instruction file on purpose a little bit so you'd feel the cringe, right? Because if there's too many things in here, shouldn't we just have defined files for each thing that we're trying to do? And if you're thinking that, watching that custom instruction file, you are 100% correct, because that's what we're about to do next. And here's my recommendation. So I recommend that you still have information in that custom instruction files that is global, but if you got things that is by certain topics, like front end, like back end, like architecture, coding standards, and so on, create separate files for those. It's going to make your maintenance a lot easier if you divide things up a little bit. So per type instruction. And let's see how we would actually do that. So now that we've created things, so we're just moving things forward from where we were. And if you see this prompt here in the bottom right, it says exactly what I just told all of you. It looks like there's a lot in that file. Create dedicated files that you think you need and suggest the location for these also. So we're about to learn two things, right? How things can be divided up and where it should be stored. So now we're waiting for the outcome here. So let it cook on it a little bit. So now it's starting to tell us, I'm analyzing your custom instructions, Chris. And yes, I am trying to figure out a way to divide this up. Okay, fair enough. What then? Well, now I'm sitting here and I think I need 10 different to do. So I think you should have a .github/docs directory, Chris. Okay, that sounds good. And in that docs directory, I'm going to create all of these files per topic. So if we're just patient a few more seconds, it should be able to create that for us. So, okay, so first it created a project overview file. That makes sense. And what else is it creating? It looks like it wants to create TypeScript guideline as a separate file. I think that sounds fair. As you know, TypeScript has a lot of different options, right? So which options are enabled for your project, that's kind of up to you. So now we're going to say, yep, I want to keep that too. And if we wait a few more seconds, you're going to see how it creates a backend development guide, which also sounds fair. And at any point in time, you can go in and say, well, I kind of disagree with your choices of TypeScript guideline, change it to this. You can totally do that. This is an iterative journey, right? This is just me showing you the first time you are creating this, what's a good way of organizing all of those custom files. So now we have created our backend guidelines. We haven't acknowledged that and saved it yet, but now it's already at work with the next guideline file, which is to create a front-end development guide, which also sounds fair. So give it a few more seconds, and it should come to a point where that is being created as well. But just to recap here, you see exactly what I was doing, right? I took this gigantic file, I divided it up by topic, so it's easier for us to see what we have and where, right? So I got backend, I got frontend, I got project overview, I got TypeScript guidance, and now it's even creating a database guideline, which could also be really useful. And all of this is being done by the AI, right? So I'm not typing a single thing here except for the prompt. So this is just the new age we're all living in, right? We have very powerful tools that does all of the heavy lifting for us, but we still have our know-how, right? As developers, we know what good looks like. So it's a good job to review whatever is being created here to make sure that it looks reasonable. But isn't it nice that it has suggested this database schema for us while we didn't have to type a single thing? So this is what it's about to create, and it's opinionated enough to say it needs Prisma. But if you need something else for your backend, that's obviously up to you. And as I said before, you can easily go into the chat mode and just type, I want something else than Prisma. But so what we've learned here is that definitely start with a custom instruction file, but your next step is probably to say, well, now that you created that for me, let's try to divide that up by topic, because then it's much more maintainable. And you should also have all of these under the GitHub/docs folder to make it easier for GitHub Copilot to find those. And one file per concern, one for front end, one for back end, one for database, one for coding guidance, however many you want, but you know, a fair amount. Right. So if you haven't heard about custom instructions before and these dedicated docs file, now you do. So hopefully at this point you're feeling, oh, wow, I need to go to my team and say, let's not have generic output from GitHub Copilot, but let's make sure that our guidance for our project is encoded. So GitHub Copilot looks at that every time it generates a response. We can do even more, right? So we have this concept called prompt files. And the idea of prompt files is that they work as your own commands. If you type / at any point using GitHub Copilot, you see that there's a long list of commands that are implemented for Azure or maybe for VS Code generally, but you can add to that. because I am sure that you have scenarios that are very specific for you. So imagine that, for example, you're trying to convert PDF files to Markdown, or you're trying to convert CSV to Excel, or there's something that you need to do every time you do something. Maybe it's generating tokens for the sake of testing. You can definitely create commands for that. So it makes it super easy for you to extend GitHub Copilot. What you need to remember, though, as you extend it, is that the command needs to have the shape of the name of the command .prompt.md. And I'll shortly show you what that looks like and how you can run it. So imagine now that you can create your own prompt library of commands that you want to use on an everyday basis to make your life easier. But don't believe me, let me show you that. So here we have actually created a command under, so if you see here at the top left, you see that we have our .github folder, but we also have our prompts folder. And within that prompts folder, we have a command here called to-excel.prompt.md. And that file is actually telling us a lot about how we can convert files from an input folder to an output folder. And these files are of type CSV, and we want to turn them into Excel. So that's just an example. And what you're looking at right now is an open file called data.csv. So this one is just simulation of someone using a POS system, a point of sale system. So it records every single transaction when you have a customer buying a product. So let's have a look at this demo and see how that could work in reality. So here is our file, and we're saying it's going to be used for the agent mode, and we give it a title that says tool to convert files to Excel format. We're telling it to look inside of an import folder and to place it in an export folder, and even how it should use to-excel.py as a file when it does this. And this is the file doing the actual conversion. But now you can see how to-excel is actually being made available. So now all I had to do was type / and the name of the command that it now recognizes because it's in that prompt folder, and I can allow it to run. And it takes a few seconds, and sometimes you just need to have GitHub Copilot do it one more time. And now it's able to convert my CSV file to an Excel file. And this is thanks to the Python code existing and the prompt file existing, and I can change whatever I want in there to fit my scenario. So wasn't that exciting, right? You can literally extend GitHub Copilot with your own bespoke commands that can do whatever you want them to do. So prompt files are great, or I would even say fantastic, to create your own / commands, prompt library of things that you do often, so that you don't want to do manually. So why not extend GitHub Copilot with these commands? So and it could also be written for different modes. As you saw, we targeted the agent, but I believe you can also target different modes for that as well. Okay. Lots of learning so far, right? I bet your head is just expanding, listening to all of these feature additions. I mean, our GitHub Copilot team is working really, really hard. I mean, they're adding so many features. And if you, by the way, is very interested and always want to see the latest and greatest features, I recommend that you look at our Visual Studio Code Insider version, because we will always release the latest and greatest we have in there before they make it eventually to the stable version of Visual Studio Code. Now, let's talk about custom chat modes, right? Because we are on a journey to customize all the things, right? And you might wonder, what do you mean custom chat mode? Well, custom chat modes simply means that we now can define specialized agents that are good at different things. And why do we want that? Well, imagine right now that you're only using GitHub Copilot with one agent mode, right? And that agent can do all the things, right? It can create files, it can edit files, it can run commands, it can produce code, but it can do everything. So wouldn't it be better if we have a set of different agents for different phases of our project? So imagine that we're still in a phase of the project where we're doing research, or maybe we are tasked with creating documentation. And you want to make sure that this agent is super focused on just one thing instead of everything. Then you get the idea of custom chat mode. So this is for you that feel like your project actually have different phases, and I want to use that agent mode and make sure that the agent stays on message. So for example, if you have a research agent that does research for your project, or a coding agent that is a specialist at the front end or the back end or security, or you might even have a project manager agent. So now you can see how virtually everyone could go inside of your project and use their favorite agent. How does that work though? How do we actually do that in VS Code? Well, it works like this. So imagine now that we are going back where we were. And let me show you that. So let's kick off this demo. Right. So what we're going to do in here is to say, oh, there's already agents in here. Planner, research, where did those come from? Well, we are creating actually a folder here on the GitHub called chat modes, and each mode is the name of the mode .chatmode.md, and here we are describing what it does. And what's important to know, oh, that was a bit quick. Let's pause here for a second. There are a few different things that you need to know here. Number one is description. This is a high-level description of what the mode is supposed to do. So I should definitely change this to say you are a front-end developer expert. The next thing here is tools. This is where you limit what the agent should do versus not do. And this is part of keeping the agent focused. So in this case, because it's a front-end developer agent, it needs a lot of rights, right? It needs the ability to search the code base, to edit files, to work with extensions, to maybe even open a browser to test something or running commands. So you can see that this agent is quite capable based on the tools list here on line 3. But now we're below here on line 6, we're giving a good description that it's a front-end developer. You can only change things related to front-end. And if you see what I've selected here at the very bottom of this description, I'm saying you must not change any backend code. And this is great. So imagine that you are worried when you use with GitHub Copilot that it suddenly has a notion of changing the database layer or the backend layer when you actually wanted to produce maybe a React component. This is a great way of scoping an agent to what it does well and ignore the rest. So now we can use this agent. You see here in the chat mode how we change it to front end, and I'm clearly telling it to work on a front-end task because I'm telling it to create a splash page. And yeah, the front-end agent is great at this, and I can guarantee you it will never try to create any backend code based on its instructions as an agent. So now we're saying that we want the splash page for our startup that teaches workshops within AI. So it should therefore work on this task for us. But let's see also, once it's done with the task, if we get a chance to talk about other chat modes like the planner and research, you will see that those agents are a bit smaller in scope, that they are good at one thing, but they don't need all the rights of the front-end developer. So yeah, great. So now it was able to create the front-end code for me. Fantastic. What else? Well, we can, of course, every type of output we get from GitHub Copilot, we want to check that out, right? And let's go to the planner. So we can see here with the planner that it has the capability of searching the code base to work with the GitHub repo. So having a look at issues, for example, and it could check, do various types of search based on the tools that I'm talking about right now. And we see here that the research thing can only do search. So now we have selected the chat mode planner. So what we're going to do with the planner now is ask it to plan the next phase of our project. Maybe we're asking it to figure out what features we need based on the source code we have, or some other nice feature. So what we can do for the sake of the planner, that give it the context of index.html. So it says, you know what, you have a splash page. What should I do next? That's a great question to ask a planner, by the way, because a planner could then anticipate what you probably should be adding to your webpage. So now it's giving you an idea, right? You should be adding a registration form. You should be adding a details section. You should add about us, a testimonial, and so on and so forth. But what we want to know as part of the planner is, so now we're actually telling the planner to create a project MD, but you will see how this will fail. And the reason it will fail to create a project is that it simply doesn't have the rights. So let's actually see what happens when I tell it to actually create a file, although it doesn't have the tool to do so. So now it's trying its best. It's trying its hardest and saying, you know what, Chris, this is what you need. Here's how I would encode all the features that you would need to build next. And then I'm telling it to create a project file, and it's really trying. And it's even putting it in such a state that, Chris, you need to create project MD yourself and copy paste this information. And now, so what I can do with it now, because I noticed that it can't do it, right? Because it's limited, it doesn't have the tool to work with files. So what do? I go into my Power Planner to give it more rights. And how do I do that? Well, I go into my tool section and see, well, first I go into my front end thing and actually tell it to see, I'm going to use one of your commands and see which commands I need. So now I'm just inspecting and saying, okay, go back to the planner and realize that if I give it the edit, I give it what's known as a tool set. So now it has more rights. It can create files, it can create directories. And if we ask this same question again to my planner, my upgraded planner, now it will have the capability of doing what I needed to do, which is to suggest my next features, but also create that project file. So you can see how that immediately worked. So that's how you work with custom chat modes. Define custom chat modes for different tasks as part of your project, add them a tool set that is reasonable for them to have, and just, if you need to adjust that tool set to fit. So what we've learned so far is have dedicated agents, right? As I said, a researcher, a planner, a front-end expert, a security expert, and make sure that you select the chat mode that makes sense for your project at that point in time. And you might not even use all of these chat modes, right? Because other team members of your team might be using them instead of you. But if you're a one person building out a project, you can just switch between the chat modes and you don't need to worry about these chat modes stepping on the toes of other parts of your projects that they shouldn't. So I actually recommend using these chat modes just to bring some order in your project. We talked a lot about basic usage of GitHub Copilot and hopefully some new features so far. And definitely we covered a lot of configuration and customization with GitHub Copilot, but there is a next level. And that next level is what's known as MCP, or Model Context Protocol. And you might be like, yeah, I've heard of that. Aren't people building servers? I'm not even using that. I'm not sure what it's for. So let's try to cover that. Let's try to cover why and what is MCP. And let's also talk about cases where we try installing a server, how we could be using a registry. And let's also look at some great examples, because that's probably what you need to get started, right? I mean, someone needs to point out an MCP server so I actually care. So with that said, let's try to explain what MCP is. And you might have heard this definition before, that it's USB or USB-C for agentic apps. What it means is that MCP is a new standard for how AI agents interact with features all over. So that means that when an agent, like for example, GitHub Copilot, that has an LLM is talking to MCP servers, it has an easy way of discovering features and using features just by you using chat. So how is that possible? Well, as part of the standard, it's defining tools, resources, and prompts. And those are the three only types of features that exist within an MCP server. And these servers could also be run locally on your machine as well as externally. So you can just mix and match servers to your liking. And some people call this function calling also on steroids. And why are they saying that? Well, imagine this. Imagine that you have the following scenario with function calling. So if you don't know what function calling is on an LLM, let's explain that shortly. Today, when you're using something like ChatGPT, right, or Copilot, it's more than just a model. You actually have, it's being extended. And how it's being extended is that you let it know that certain functions exist, all right? So this is what is known as function calling. So we take a function that we wrote in, for example, Node.js or Python, we turn that into a JSON version, we tuck that into the LLM, and suddenly the LLM is aware of capabilities. But how this changes in the context of MCP is that these functions now, they don't have to live in one app anymore, but in several apps. In fact, in several servers. So this is a great way of only creating functions that belong to logical boundaries. So everything that has to do with orders or flights or car bookings all of that can be its own dedicated server. So here you have an example of how a number of MCP servers together could be solving a travel booking scenario, for example. So here you can figure out flights via one server, hotels via another, and banks by a third server, and the fourth server is actually running locally and can integrate with our local file system. Okay, so you might be wondering, what about installation? How does that work? Well, you need to know this. You have a .vs Code folder that you should be creating in your project. Once you do, you should place a file called mcp.json in there. This is a manifest file that says exactly which servers you have installed. So once you add an entry in this mcp.json file, those servers are installed or known to GitHub Copilot. And there are, of course, different ways of installing these, of course. You can manually edit the file. I tend to do that because that was the only support that existed 6 months ago. But nowadays, you can add it via the UI easily through VS Code, or you could add it through our brand new registry that you can access by going into the extension part and typing @mcp. So if you've tuned in, if you have Visual Studio Code open up the extension tool here on the left side, start typing @mcp, and you will see the registry working, listing a bunch of MCP servers that you could be installing. But this is essentially how it works. So imagine now that I've created the .vs Code folder, I've created an MCP.json in there. This is what ends up happening to your file. So it places a number of servers under the server's name, and these servers could be of different kinds depending on where they run and which type they are. So I think in MCP you have SSC, you have Streamable HTTP, you have Standard IO as different transports. And based on which transport, it looks slightly different, but it's not a huge difference. But my point is, once you populate this file, this is the same thing as saying to Visual Studio Code, you now know of this server. But you might also need to click the start button to make sure that the connection is being made between GitHub Copilot and the server itself. But this is all you need to do. But as I said before, you can manually do this, or you can add the user interface and it just populates this file for you. And once everything is set up, you can just go back to your GitHub Copilot, make sure it's in agent mode, and now you will be able to type prompts. And if that prompt matches what one of the tools on an MCP server, you will see a dialog like so. And in this dialog is now showing, I'm about to run a tool. I'm asking you, Chris, for your permission to run this tool that runs on an MCP server. So that is how things work from a developer standpoint, right? Create your MCP JSON file, add entries for the installed servers, and then you can use it like so from GitHub Copilot and its chat mode, and make sure that agent mode is selected. So let's actually try to demo this a little bit so you get a sense of how that works. So now we have our MCP JSON, right? We have a number of MCP servers here, and we need to make sure that they are started before we start using them. This demo is also showing what it's like to be a developer developing these servers, because you can totally build them yourself, even though there are a lot of great servers. Clicking this tools icon shows you all the servers that are installed and all the tools under these servers. And now we can type a prompt that kind of will match the tool then under this installed MCP server. So now we're telling it to add 2 numbers, and hopefully that means that this server reacts. And as you can see, it's parsing the prompt, so it's able to match what's in the prompt to the input parameters of the tool. And now we're saying to it, add 18 and 2 just as an extra test to make sure it works. And it's able to parse that nicely, and all we need to do is hit the continue button, and the tool ends up being run, and you can see the end response. But as a developer listening in on this, you're like, yeah, Chris, but I don't really want to add 2 numbers together. I'm a developer. I care about my developer workflow. And that's a great point, which is why I'm showing you a really useful server, MCP server for you as a developer, namely documentation on the fly. I bet all of you listening in here have 20 tabs open to solve a single feature, right? Or at least 10 tabs. And you might even have several monitors. But the point is, you are doing this. You're moving your head left or right to look at documentation, and then you go back to your IDE. And what I'm trying to communicate right now is to tell you to stop doing that. Close all those tabs and install Microsoft Docs. So if you add this entry here, this URL in your MCP JSON file, you will have instant access to all of Microsoft Docs. So if you're working on something Azure or something Microsoft, you will have instant access to our documentation without leaving Visual Studio Code. That sounds fantastic, right? So let's have a look at the demo. So here we have done exactly that. So if you see from line 30 up here, you see that we have created the name for it. We have given it a type HTTP. It's one of the transports. And we have specified that URL that you just saw. And we need to start it. So once we've started it, it should be working. But let's kick off this demo. So now we see it. We have a URL, it's set up, and we're hitting start. And that means it's handshaking now between GitHub Copilot and the Docs MCP server. And let's double check to see the server that is up and running and what tools are available. You can see that there are quite a few tools that uses MCP already, but Microsoft Docs Search. So let's say that we are trying to integrate AI, right? Especially Azure AI Foundry. And we might not know where to start. All right. So for that reason, we know that Microsoft guaranteed have a lot of docs, a lot of learn modules about this. So now we're asking it to show me some modules so I can start learning about AI, right? And now you can see how the MCP server is being invoked and that specific tool. And it starts giving us response directly from this MCP server instead of us having to go to a web browser. Okay. But that's a lot, right? Let's say that you're a complete beginner and you're like, oh my God, too much info. So at this point, you can just ask it to filter it down and say, where should I start? So now you're able to filter down the response. So do me all a favor. If you got tabs open for documentation, close those, install this server. It already works for you. And I promise you, your life is going to be easier. That's one very, very useful MCP server that I totally recommend that you all install. Another MCP server that you could be using is Playwright. If you haven't heard about Playwright before, it is an end-to-end testing tool. And for all end-to-end tests, you know that it takes a bit of time to actually figure out how to write these tests, right? Because you need to go to the website, you need to identify the input elements, the buttons, how the interaction works. And by the time you figure that out, you have to start typing code. But it's great. It's a great framework. But with MCP, we can solve all that. So how can we do it? 2 steps. So what I'm about to show you in the demo is first how you let Playwright discover your page based on a prompt. And then I'm going to show you how you can just take that prompt and leverage that to write Playwright tests. So let's start. Let's start with our use case. And let's point out also how we have installed this thing, because install of MCP servers looks different. They just do. So you can see here, for example, below here on line 36, we have installed the Microsoft Docs server before. But here with Playwright, it's a slightly different install because this is actually running on our machine. So here you see how it uses the npx command and how it points out at Playwright MCP at latest to use that. And we can also see how it's running because we hit the start button before. So that's great. It's ready for business. What we need to do at this point is go to our chat and state our business, what we want done. And this description here says that we want to go to TfL, so that's travel for London. And we want to go from Paddington, a station in London, to Heathrow, which is the airport. So now we're just waiting for the MCP server to come back to us and say, I'm starting to discover this website. So it knows nothing about the website to begin with, right? And it just goes through all the different inputs, all the different drop downs, all the different buttons to figure out how to do this. And yeah, as I said, this is great because we don't have to do this as developers, right? We don't even have to look at the site. All we know is that we have a use case that needs to be fulfilled. So now we're just waiting for it to figure out the website, figure out the input elements. And after a while, it will come to a point where it says, I've done all the things and I'm ready to give you a response. And I believe we are almost there. And yeah, let's see. I think there's 1 or 2 more steps it needs to take before it actually delivers us a response. And the reason that there are so many clicks here is that if you go to this travel site, the input elements are actually drop down. So once you start typing, it produces a drop drop list, and you need to make a selection. Okay, so now it's saying I've done all the things. I've gone through your website. I'm starting to understand how to navigate your website. So now it's interacting with me as an end user, and yes, I'm telling it back that yes, I want to see a summary of everything. So now it knows exactly how to call that. And we end up with an end result from this travel website, TFL, and we should be given instructions how we could travel to the airport. So now it's giving us different options with underground and buses and what else. But at this point, you might be like, well, I don't actually need a bus. Maybe I want to focus on an underground. So I can write tube, which is what we say in England here for our underground. And so now it's filtering the response. But the good news here is that if we prompt one more time, we can actually solve the situation with end-to-end test, because at this point, we can actually tell it to generate tests for Playwright based on our user interaction. So just by adding one more prompt, we could just say, you've done all this interaction, now write Playwright tests for it. So that's really the mic drop for you as a end developer, right? But there's another MCP server I wanted to show you all, because I believe in bringing values to developers, right? For you to even care about MCP, I think it's super important that you are bought in as end users in the first place before you start building them. So another MCP server that you could also be using is managing your files. So that means instead of you opening up Explorer or a terminal or whatever you use to list your files, list your directories, you can install an MCP server instead that's given similar rights. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What do you mean, Chris? Am I going to let GitHub Copilot read my file system? That sounds incredibly dangerous. Well, for that reason, there is a configuration in this MCP server, so you can definitely give it filters and say, you can only access this folder or do this and that with that folder. So yes, definitely be careful when it comes to this file system thing. So here again, like before, we are populating our MCP JSON, and we see how we are giving it the MPX here together with the name of this server. And like before, it's being installed locally. And if you see here on line 41, you see that we added a filter to block it from accessing anything that's outside of the system. So don't worry about your password. Don't worry about your SSH keys, because we are now saying to it that you can only read the temp folder. Okay, so we're actually going to try to break out of this temp folder. So the first few prompts we're going to type here is literally going to ask it to read information elsewhere. So our first question is triggering now a tool on the MCP server, so listing allowed directories, and we can start continue to prompt and say list content of C:users. That would be dangerous, right? And now saying, yep, sorry, Chris, I can't access that content. And now I'm saying list content of directory you have access to. So now at this point, I kind of give up. It doesn't seem like I can break out of these rules. So now it's starting to list the content directory. It's telling me of subdirectories. It's telling me about files. And maybe I want to actually read content of those files. I can totally do that as well. And so, for example, let's say I want to sum up the amount of order CSV, and I want the result of that summation to end up in a third file. I can totally do that as well. So completely up to you if you want to use this thing, but if you don't want a lot of windows open, one for the Explorer, one for your editor, one for your features, there's a lot of tips I gave you today, MCP servers that you could be installing to make life a lot easier. So what did we learn so far? We learned that Model Context Protocol, known as MCP, is a standard for AI agents. The immediate win for you as a developer is probably the Docs one from Microsoft, but also the Playwright and the file system one. That's completely up to you. But there is a vetted registry. So go inside of your extension thing on the left menu and start typing @MCP, and you will see a list of vetted servers. You can install those with great confidence. Some MCP servers are great for you as developers, but some others are great for your projects with customers. For example, Stripe have their own MCP server, and most of the business system that you're likely to interact with have their own MCP servers as well. Figma, for example, have a great MCP server. So if you're someone who generates a lot of UI sketches, Figma is definitely worth looking into. So this is a standard. A lot of companies are bought into using MCP, so definitely try doing that as well. So we have come to the point of trying to summarize today's learning. I know it's been a very intense hour with a lot of new features, but hopefully good features, useful features that you will be using. There are different modes, as I said. There's the Ask mode that probably everyone knows about if you use GitHub Copilot. There's the Edit mode for multiple file edits. And there's the Agent mode. That is the mode that can do a lot of things for you, right? Scaffolding files, changing files, running commands, and so on and so forth. But before you even venture forth to use that agent, I want to make sure that whatever the agent is generating for you, make sure that that passes through your system of custom files. Custom instructions is where you should begin. This is your truth, that these are generic descriptions for things that it should abide by, but I definitely recommend having dedicated files in a docs folder for the front end, for the back end, for the database, for code standard, and so on and so forth. Prompt files is how you extend GitHub Copilot, right? So if you see slash commands today, you can have your own for things that you do often. That could be made so much easier if they were turned into slash commands. Chat modes is how you have dedicated agents that do different things. Definitely scope these agents to what they should be good at, like planning, front-end dev, security, and so on. And you also saw, as I was showcasing these chat modes, how you could limit them in terms of what tools they should or should not have. And lastly, today we talked about MCP, how that's a new standard. So whether you are integrating AI or you just want a better GitHub Copilot, that's something in here for you. So documentation, that's something I definitely recommend that you use. So our MCP Learn server, install that thing based on what I showed you today. End-to-end test writing, that's definitely something that Playwright could do. And file system, there's even an MCP server for GitHub. So yes, you can definitely in a prompt say that I want the GitHub agent to build me a new dark mode, or maybe add tests, or whatever you want. But definitely check out the registry that we have. Go into extensions, type @MCP, and you will see a bunch of MCP servers, so you can get on board and have a lot better experience. So with that said, let's try to take some questions. Hopefully you have a lot of questions, and yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point.
Chris, we got a few questions. At the beginning of the session, we were asked, what's the cost of getting GitHub Copilot?
So that varies a bit by what region you live in, but usually it's somewhere between $10 and $20 a month. But as I said, it's cheaper in certain regions than others, but that's roughly the cost of it. That should be roughly what it costs for Cursor also. I think most of the big AI tool providers have a very similar price, honestly.
Next question was, in case we choose to edit mode, then how are we notified of the operations done upon our query?
In case we choose to edit mode, then how? Yeah, this is a great question, and I believe it does a very similar interaction as with agent mode. So with edit mode and edit mode, right? It both edits a lot of different files. You will always see that notification that's asking you to accept it, right? So if you recall what I showed you, you will always see this keep button versus undo button, right? So you'll always be presented. You will always be told to accept a change. It will not just willy-nilly do changes and you have no idea what happened. It will always show you this user interface.
Then is there a version control option available for the GitHub edits so that one can roll back?
So I think that's a great question. But as I said, you can, because it pops up this user interface and say, I changed this file to that, it will visually show you what changes it did. And if you don't like what's in there, you can just hit undo. And if you by mistake press keep instead, you can just do Control-Z, right? And then it just backs up whatever change it did. And if even that doesn't help, then you always have Git, and you can undo that before you commit it. So yeah, I think it's great questions, but it will definitely show you a visual mode of changes. So it will look exactly like a git diff.
And the last question, what does the add command do when typed in the prompt section?
Yeah, so this is a good one, because here's the thing: @ commands and / commands, they are, I'm not sure why we have different ones, because the way I see it, they're kind of used for similar things. So in my opinion, @ commands are a bit more powerful, that they usually can interact with Azure, or they can interact with Visual Studio Code. So they usually do bigger things. So in my opinion, / commands, the / is usually specific prompts that the GitHub Copilot team has written for you already, just like I showed you the conversion / command that I created. Whereas the @ command has more powerful API access. So if you're asking it to interact with VS Code, for example, or GitHub, it ends up running a task that for example, creates an issue if it's GitHub, or if it's Azure, it ends up maybe deploying something. So I would think of @ commands as more powerful and / commands as more specialized prompts, if that makes sense.
We got 2 more questions if you have time, Chris.
Totally.
I'm not sure if I understood, but I'll pop it on the screen for you. When Copilot extension will be deprecated soon, how MCP can replace it?
Oh, this is an interesting one. Let me think about how to address this. I would say this: the GitHub Copilot team has definitely said that Visual Studio Code these days are an AI-first editor. So I think you will see more and more how we don't think about GitHub Copilot as a separate thing, but rather it's there all the time. So we definitely change our messaging from saying Visual Studio Code, the editor, GitHub Copilot as the AI agent part that you can also install. So I think you will see as part of our messaging how Visual Studio Code barely can exist without GitHub Copilot. So in that sense, I can't give you a timeline when and if that will happen, but I think you will see in the messaging how we are talking about Visual Studio Code as an AI-first editor. So it wouldn't surprise me if actually GitHub Copilot extension does disappear and these things are just built in. It's a very good question, but I can't give you a timeline, and I'm not sure whether we will actually deprecate it completely. But the way things are moving, we are definitely saying that this is just part of what Visual Studio Code is.
The next question is, what about the privacy and security of using GitHub Copilot?
Yeah, fantastic question. And the answer here is that if you're an enterprise customer, there is a setting that's disabled at the moment where we ask about training data. So that means if you are an enterprise customer, we will never train on your data unless you explicitly opt in. Now, if you're using GitHub Copilot as it is, as a normal user, that's a setting that you need to disable. So you're saying, don't use my private data. So, but generally, there are a couple of things here. Like one, you don't want it to use your training data, right? And by saying that, you are also isolated, right? So if you don't use your training data, that means your session with the GitHub Copilot is like yours, right? It will never leak to someone else. But one thing I also wanted to add for the sake of compliance is that if for some reason you are using code that GitHub Copilot has generated, and for some reason someone takes you to court because that looks like the private code of some other company, we will actually defend you in the court. So that's a written promise that we have on our GitHub page where we're saying that. So we want you to feel good and secure about using an AI agent that generates code, but also we have these controls in place. So you as an enterprise never have to worry whether we're going to use your data unless you explicitly opt in.
And to complement the previous question, Pranav just sent, does Microsoft, as an acquirer of GitHub Copilot, has access to my codes and programs?
So generally, how GitHub Copilot has been trained is on public repositories. So if your code has been living in public repositories, the answer is yes, because those have been used to train GitHub Copilot. If it's private repositories, my understanding is that we're not using those to train on, because we obviously respect our customers in that respect. So every time something is private or a company org, we take these matters really seriously, right? Because we don't want that to be part of your of the training data, as I mentioned before. So I would say from a compliance standpoint, we are doing everything we can, but if you feel like we can do something additionally, we would like to hear it.
The last question from Dean. Are there any pre-prepared custom instruction files which implement generally accepted ways of working for various types of software and languages?
I love that question, Dean. So, and the answer here is that we have a repository called Awesome Copilot. So if you search for Awesome-Copilot, that's actually a set of prompt files, custom modes, and a lot of other things that we recommend you install. And that's actually an MCP server. So that will end up populating your repository with a lot of these things that I showed you today, from prompt files to custom modes. These are our best recommendations for a variety of languages. So .NET, Java, JavaScript, Python. So remember the name Awesome Copilot. Awesome Copilot MCP server. So definitely install that if you're curious to see what our best recommendation are. My org actually created that one. So if you got any feedback for us in terms of what you want to see there, do let me know. So let's see if I can actually find that link for you. 1 second. But that's a great question because everyone wants to have the best practice here. Let's see. Am I able to paste? You know what, Larissa, I'm going to send you that link so you can amend our recording with it. But yeah, definitely
Yes,
look for Awesome Copilot.
That's all. That was our last question. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all tuning in, and stay tuned for another episode soon, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Susan. Thank you all for joining our session today. Thank you, Chris, for the content presented. We went a little bit over our time, but it's always amazing to have good presentations being shared here. And for you, we are always looking to improve our sessions and experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find the link on the screen or in the chat, and we'll see you in the next one.